You're told you did a great job, and instead of feeling good, you feel wrong, uncomfortable, suspicious. Why does praise feel like an attack? There are people who receive compliments the way most people receive criticism, with immediate defensiveness, discomfort, or outright rejection. Tell them they look nice, and they'll list everything wrong with their appearance. Praise their work, and they'll minimize the achievement or redirect credit elsewhere. Acknowledge their kindness, and they'll act like you're accusing them of something. This isn't false modesty or fishing for more compliments. It's genuine discomfort, sometimes bordering on distress. The compliment, meant to build someone up, instead creates psychological tension that demands immediate resolution, usually through deflection, denial, or dismissal. If this is you, you've probably been told you should just learn to accept compliments gracefully, to say thank you and move on. But it's not that simple. Your discomfort isn't irrational. It's rooted in complex psychological mechanisms, past experiences, and cognitive patterns that make compliments feel dangerous rather than pleasant. Today, we're exploring why some people genuinely dislike receiving compliments. Not the surface reasons, but the deeper psychological currents running beneath that immediate spike of discomfort when someone says something nice about you. Understanding these mechanisms might not make compliments suddenly feel good, but it might help you understand yourself better and decide whether this pattern serves you or sabotages you. The self-concept disruption. The first and perhaps most fundamental reason compliments create discomfort is that they threaten your existing self-concept. You have a story about who you are, what you're capable of, how you compare to others. This story is stable, familiar, and central to your psychological functioning. A compliment that contradicts this story creates cognitive dissonance, and your brain finds that dissonance painful. Psychologist Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance explains that humans are motivated to maintain consistency between their beliefs. When you hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, you experience psychological discomfort that demands resolution. If your self-concept is, "I'm not particularly attractive," and someone says you look beautiful, these beliefs clash. Your brain has to resolve this somehow. Most people resolve it by updating their self-concept slightly, or by integrating the compliment as an exception. But people who deeply dislike compliments often have such rigid negative self-concepts that updating feels threatening to their entire psychological structure. They've organized their identity, their expectations, their life strategies around a particular understanding of themselves. A compliment that contradicts this understanding isn't just wrong. It's destabilizing. This is particularly true if your negative self-concept serves protective functions. Maybe you've told yourself you're not smart to avoid the pressure of high expectations. Maybe you've told yourself you're not attractive to protect against the vulnerability of being desired. Maybe you've told yourself you're not talented to avoid the risk of trying and failing. These negative self-concepts, while painful, create a certain safety. You can't be disappointed if you never expected much. When someone compliments you in one of these areas, they're not just contradicting your self-assessment. They're threatening the protective function of that self-assessment. If you accept that you might be smart, you now have to deal with the pressure and vulnerability you were avoiding. Your brain, recognizing this threat, generates discomfort with the compliment itself. Psychologist Terrell Dweck's research on self-theories shows that people with fixed mindsets have more rigid self-concepts. They believe their qualities are static, so information contradicting their self-assessment feels more threatening than it does to people with growth mindsets who expect their qualities to change and develop. But beyond mindset, there's the issue of identity investment. Some people have invested heavily in their negative self-concepts. "I'm the ugly one," or "I'm the screw-up" becomes not just a description but an identity. Other people know them this way. They know themselves this way. Their relationships and life patterns are organized around this identity. A compliment challenges not just self-assessment, but self-definition. The discomfort you feel when complimented might be your brain protecting against the massive reorganization that would be required if you updated your self-concept. It's easier to reject the compliment than to rebuild your entire understanding of who you are and restructure your life around that new understanding. The imposter syndrome mechanism. Related but distinct from self-concept disruption is imposter syndrome. the persistent belief that your achievements are fraudulent and that you'll eventually be exposed as incompetent despite evidence of your actual competence. Psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes first identified this pattern, finding that high-achieving people often attributed their success to luck, timing, or deceiving others into overestimating their abilities, rather than to their own merit. When you have imposter syndrome, compliments don't feel validating. They feel threatening. Each compliment is evidence that you've successfully fooled someone else into thinking you're more capable than you actually are, which increases the stakes when you're eventually exposed. The compliment becomes a weight, adding to the pressure of maintaining a facade you believe will eventually collapse. This is why imposter syndrome sufferers often feel worse after success than after failure. Failure confirms their internal narrative that they're frauds. Success creates cognitive dissonance and increases pressure. A compliment on your work means more people now have false beliefs about your competence that you'll eventually disappoint. The psychology here involves attribution patterns. When you accomplish something, you attribute it externally. I got lucky. The task was easy. Others helped me. I happen to know that particular thing. When you fail, you attribute it internally. I'm not good enough. I don't have what it takes. I'm a fraud. This attribution pattern maintains the imposter syndrome, regardless of actual performance. Compliments force you to confront your accomplishment directly. Someone is telling you that what you did was good, and that goodness reflects on you. But your internal narrative says the accomplishment was external factors, not you. The compliment contradicts your careful external attribution, making you feel even more fraudulent because now someone is giving you credit you don't deserve. Research shows imposter syndrome is particularly common among high achievers in competitive fields, among women and minorities in male-dominated or majority-dominated spaces, and among people who were praised excessively for being naturally gifted as children rather than for effort and improvement. If you were told you were smart or talented as a child without doing anything to earn it, you might have internalized that your value comes from innate qualities rather than work. Then when you do work hard to achieve something, you feel fraudulent accepting praise because you know you had to work for it, which contradicts the narrative that you're just naturally gifted. The compliment feels like it's for someone else, the effortlessly talented version of you that doesn't actually exist. The discomfort with compliments in this case is about maintaining the separation between your internal experience of struggling and the external perception of competence. You know how hard it was, how much you doubted, how close you came to failing. The person complimenting you doesn't see that. They see only the polished result. Their compliment feels based on incomplete information, and accepting it would be accepting a false image. The obligation and vulnerability trigger. The third major source of compliment discomfort is the sense that receiving a compliment creates obligation or exposes you to vulnerability. This operates on the principle of reciprocity. When someone gives you something, even something intangible like praise, social norms suggest you owe something in return. Psychologist Robert Cialdini's research on influence shows that reciprocity is one of the most powerful social norms. When someone does something for you, you feel obligated to reciprocate. A compliment, while not a favor in the traditional sense, can trigger this reciprocity pressure. If someone compliments you, do you have to compliment them back? Do you owe them something now? Are they going to expect something from you? For people who value autonomy highly, or who have had experiences where kindness came with strings attached, compliments can feel like traps. The praise is the hook, and accepting it means you're now in social debt. Better to deflect or reject the compliment than to take on obligation. This is particularly true if you've had manipulative relationships where compliments were used instrumentally. Someone praises you excessively, then leverages that praise to make requests or create expectations. I've been so supportive of you, and this is how you treat me. The compliment becomes a tool for future guilt tripping. Learning that pattern, you become wary of all compliments, seeing potential manipulation even when none is intended. There's also vulnerability in being seen positively. If someone notices something good about you, they're paying attention. They see you. For people who prefer to stay under the radar, who find safety in invisibility, being noticed feels dangerous even when the notice is positive. The compliment reveals that you're visible, that your actions or appearance are being observed and evaluated. If they're evaluating you positively now, they could evaluate you negatively later. Psychologist Brené Brown's research on vulnerability shows that people vary dramatically in their tolerance for being seen. For some, visibility is affirming. For others, it's terrifying. Compliments increase visibility, putting a spotlight on you that you might prefer to avoid. The discomfort isn't about the content of the compliment, but about the increased attention and exposure it represents. Moreover, accepting a compliment requires a moment of vulnerability where you acknowledge that someone's opinion of you matters, that their words affected you. For people who guard their emotions carefully or who've been hurt by caring what others think, this vulnerability is intolerable. Deflecting the compliment is a way of maintaining emotional armor, of not letting anyone know that their words matter to you. The calculation is, if I accept this compliment, I'm admitting that I want to be seen this way, that I care about this person's opinion, that I'm affected by their words. All of this creates vulnerability. If I reject or minimize the compliment, I maintain the stance that others' opinions don't matter, that I'm unmoved, that I'm safe behind my defenses. The temporary social awkwardness of rejecting a compliment feels safer than the ongoing vulnerability of having admitted you care. The sincerity doubt. The fourth major factor is suspicion about the compliment's sincerity. You doubt that the person actually means what they're saying. They're being polite, or they want something, or they're saying what they think they're supposed to say, but it's not genuine. This doubt makes the compliment feel empty or manipulative, rather than affirming. This pattern often develops from experiences where praise was indeed insincere. Maybe you had parents who gave generic praise, without actually paying attention to what you did. "Good job," Honey said while looking at their phone, clearly not actually engaged with your accomplishment. The words said one thing, but the delivery said they didn't care. You learned that compliments can be empty performances. Or maybe you've encountered enough social situations where compliments are currency, exchanged as part of social lubrication rather than as genuine assessments. Everyone tells everyone else they look nice, did a great job, have a lovely home. It's just what you say. The compliments are true in the way, "How are you?" is true when you don't actually want to know how someone is. They're social scripts, not sincere communications. Research by psychologist Bella DePaulo on lying in daily life found that people tell small lies constantly, and many of these lies are white lies aimed at being polite or making others feel good. If you're aware of this research, or have simply noticed this pattern, you might become cynical about compliments, assuming they're more likely to be polite fictions than honest assessments. This cynicism is particularly strong in people with certain attachment styles. Psychologist Mary Ainsworth's research on attachment showed that people with anxious attachment often doubt others' positive regard, interpreting reassurance as potentially manipulative or unreliable. A compliment from someone with secure attachment feels affirming. The same compliment to someone with anxious attachment triggers doubt. Why are they saying this? What do they want? Are they being real or just being nice? There's also the issue of compliment specificity. Generic compliments like "you're great" or "good job" feel less sincere than specific ones like "the way you handled that question about implementation showed real strategic thinking." The specific compliment demonstrates that the person was actually paying attention, that they have a basis for their assessment. The generic one could be said to anyone about anything. If most compliments you receive are generic, you might learn that compliments are social noise rather than genuine communication. When someone does give you a specific compliment, you might not recognize it as different from the generic ones, filtering it through the same cynicism. The discomfort here comes from the disconnect between what's being said and what you believe. The person is saying you did well, but you don't believe they actually think that. This creates a weird social situation where you're supposed to respond to their stated message while knowing their actual message is different. Do you play along with a polite fiction? Do you call them out on the insincerity? Neither option feels good, so you just feel uncomfortable and want the interaction to end. The perfectionism trap. The fifth factor is perfectionism's distortion of how you process compliments. When you have perfectionistic standards, compliments for anything less than perfect feel like misunderstandings. The person is complimenting your work, but you know all the ways it falls short of what it should have been. Their praise feels based on lower standards or insufficient information. Psychologist Thomas Greenspann's research on perfectionism shows that perfectionists often have an internal ideal that's extremely specific and demanding. Real accomplishments are constantly compared to this ideal and found wanting. When someone else, operating with different and lower standards, compliments the accomplishment, the perfectionist experiences dissonance. From your perspective, you know you could have done better. You see every flaw, every shortcut, every compromise you made in producing this work. The compliment feels like it's for a version of the work that doesn't exist, the version you wanted to produce rather than the flawed version you actually produce. Accepting the compliment would mean accepting the flawed version as good enough, which violates your perfectionistic standards. This is particularly painful with compliments about your effort or about overcoming difficulty. Someone says you work so hard on this and you hear an implication that you're not naturally talented enough to do it easily. Someone says you've come so far and you hear an implication that you started from a low point. These compliments, intended to be encouraging, feel like they're highlighting your deficiencies. Perfectionists also struggle with compliments because compliments represent endpoints, and perfectionism has no endpoints. The project is never really finished, just abandoned when time runs out. Your appearance is never actually good, just acceptable for this particular context. Your performance is never truly excellent, just adequate given the circumstances. A compliment suggests completion or achievement, but you experience ongoing inadequacy and potential for improvement. Research shows that perfectionists often engage in what's called discounting the positive, a cognitive distortion where positive feedback is dismissed or minimized while negative feedback is amplified. 100 people can compliment your work, and one person can criticize it, and you'll focus entirely on the criticism because it aligns with your own self-assessment, while the compliments feel anomalous or based on ignorance. The discomfort with compliments, in this case, is about maintaining perfectionistic standards. If you accepted compliments at face value, you'd have to acknowledge that your standards might be unreasonably high, that what you've accomplished might actually be good enough. This threatens the entire perfectionistic system you've built your identity and motivation around. Better to reject the compliment than to question whether your impossible standards are serving you. The comparison contamination. The sixth factor is how compliments trigger social comparison. When someone compliments you, you don't hear it in isolation. You immediately compare yourself to others, to their accomplishments, to what you imagine they've achieved, or how they look, or what they're capable of. The compliment might be positive in absolute terms, but relative to others, you still come up short. Psychologist Leon Festinger's social comparison theory explains that humans evaluate themselves by comparing to others. This is natural and often useful. But for some people, social comparison becomes a compulsive cognitive habit that poisons every potential positive evaluation. You can't just be good at something. You have to be better than others, or the accomplishment doesn't count. When someone compliments your work, your mind immediately catalogs people whose work is better. When someone says you look nice, you think of people who are more attractive. When someone praises your kindness, you think of people who are kinder. The compliment is true in some limited sense, but it's not enough to matter because it doesn't establish superiority or even equality with those you compare yourself to. This pattern is particularly strong in competitive environments, where you've learned that relative performance matters more than absolute performance. In school, it didn't matter if you understood the material as long as you scored higher than others. In work, it doesn't matter if you're good as long as you're better than colleagues competing for the same promotions. In these contexts, you learn to evaluate yourself comparatively rather than absolutely. A compliment gives you absolute evaluation, someone saying you did well, or look good, or are talented. But your brain can only process relative evaluation, automatically comparing you to reference groups and finding you lacking. The compliment feels meaningless, or even cruel, because it ignores the comparison that actually matters to you. Social media has amplified this dramatically. You're constantly exposed to carefully curated highlights of others' lives, creating impossible comparison standards. Someone compliments your vacation photo, but you've just scrolled through 50 vacation photos from tropical destinations while yours is from a local park. The compliment can't overcome the comparison context. Research by psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky shows that people who habitually compare themselves to others are less happy than people who focus on their own progress and absolute standards. But knowing this doesn't make comparison easy to stop. It's an automatic cognitive habit, and compliments trigger it reflexively. The discomfort here is that compliments force you to acknowledge your own accomplishments or qualities in a way that your comparative mindset has trained you to minimize. You can't just accept that you did something good because good is meaningless without better. The person complimenting you is using absolute standards that feel foreign and inadequate to your comparative framework. The fear of elevated expectations. The seventh factor is that compliments raise expectations, and higher expectations mean more pressure and more opportunity for disappointment. If someone thinks you're talented or attractive or competent, they'll expect more from you going forward. If you fail to meet those expectations, the disappointment will be worse than if they'd never complimented you in the first place. This is particularly true with compliments about ability rather than effort. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research shows that praising someone for being smart or talented, fixed traits, creates pressure to maintain that image. If you're praised for effort or strategy, things you control, you can continue doing those things. But if you're praised for ability, you're stuck with whatever ability you have, and future performance might not meet expectations. The person who tells you you're brilliant is now expecting brilliant work. What if your next project is just competent? They'll be disappointed. They'll think you're not living up to your potential. They'll wonder what's wrong. The compliment creates a standard you now have to meet repeatedly, and the pressure of that is worse than the brief pleasure of the original praise. This fear is rational if you've experienced the pattern where early success or early compliments led to unrealistic expectations that you couldn't sustain. Maybe you were a gifted child, praised extensively for early achievements, then struggled when the work got harder, and you were still expected to excel effortlessly. The compliments became traps, setting standards you couldn't maintain. Or maybe you've been in relationships where someone idealized you early on, complimenting you excessively, then became disappointed when the real you, flawed and human, failed to match their inflated image. The initial compliments felt good, but they set up an inevitable fall. You learned that compliments are dangerous because they create illusions that reality will eventually shatter. Research on what psychologists call the pedestal effect shows that being idealized in relationships creates pressure to maintain an impossible image. When you inevitably fail, which you will because you're human, the disappointment is severe. It's better to never be put on a pedestal than to be elevated and then knocked down. The discomfort with compliments, in this case, is anticipatory. You're not uncomfortable with what the person is saying now. You're uncomfortable with the future pressure and potential disappointment you see coming. The compliment is the first step in a process that ends badly, so you reject it at the first step to avoid the later steps. The shame activation. The eighth and perhaps most painful factor is that compliments can activate shame, particularly if your sense of self is built on being undeserving or bad. If you have deep shame about who you are, compliments feel like lies or like the person doesn't really know you. If they knew the real you, the shameful truth you're hiding, they wouldn't be saying these nice things. Psychologist Brené Brown defined shame as the painful feeling that you're fundamentally flawed and unworthy of connection. For people carrying deep shame, compliments create agonizing cognitive dissonance. The person is saying you're good, but your core belief is that you're bad. These can't both be true, and your deep shame wins. The compliment must be wrong. This is different from simple low self-esteem. Low self-esteem says, I'm not good at this, or I'm not attractive. Shame says I'm bad, fundamentally wrong, undeserving of good things. When you carry shame, any good thing, including compliments, triggers the shame because it highlights the gap between how you're being seen and how you see yourself. Shame often develops from childhood experiences of emotional neglect, abuse, or intense criticism. If you internalized messages that you're not enough, that you're the problem, that you're unlovable, these messages become core beliefs. Later, compliments can't dislodge beliefs formed in childhood when your brain was most plastic and most dependent on caregivers' feedback for self-understanding. The compliment isn't just disagreeing with your current self-assessment. It's disagreeing with your fundamental understanding of yourself, formed in the crucible of early development. Your brain, protecting its core understanding of reality, rejects the compliment as anomalous data that doesn't fit the pattern. Moreover, shame creates a fear of being truly seen. If someone really sees you, they'll see the shameful truth, and they'll reject you. So compliments feel dangerous because they suggest the person is seeing you, paying attention to you. You need them to not see you so clearly, because close inspection would reveal what you're trying to hide. The discomfort here is existential. The compliment threatens your entire understanding of yourself. Accepting it would require dismantling shame structures built over decades. It's easier to reject the compliment than to reconstruct your self-concept from the ground up. Conclusion. These 8 factors, self-concept disruption, imposter syndrome, obligation and vulnerability, sincerity doubt, perfectionism, comparison contamination, elevated expectations, and shame activation. They often operate simultaneously, creating a complex layered resistance to compliments that feels overwhelming even when you can't articulate exactly why. The person giving you a compliment has no idea they're triggering all these mechanisms. From their perspective, they said something nice, and you made it weird. But from your perspective, they've activated multiple psychological defense systems, created cognitive dissonance, triggered shame, raised expectations, and made you vulnerable. Of course you're uncomfortable. Understanding these mechanisms doesn't instantly make compliments feel good. But it does help you recognize that your discomfort is coming from inside your own psychology rather than from the compliment itself. The compliment is neutral. Your response is the variable. This matters because these mechanisms, while they protected you in some way at some point, might not be serving you anymore. Rejecting compliments means rejecting positive feedback that could inform more accurate self-assessment. It means pushing away people who are trying to connect with you. It means missing opportunities to update outdated self-concepts. You don't have to learn to love compliments, but you might want to examine whether your discomfort with them is serving you or limiting you. Are these mechanisms protecting you from genuine threats, or are they defending against threats that no longer exist, leaving you isolated and unable to take in positive information about yourself? The next time you feel that uncomfortable spike when someone compliments you, pause before your automatic deflection. Notice which of these mechanisms is activating. Is it shame? Comparison? Perfectionism? Just noticing creates space between the trigger and your response. In that space, you might find room for a different choice. You don't have to accept every compliment at face value. Some compliments are indeed insincere or manipulative. But rejecting all compliments, because some might be suspect, means you're protecting yourself at the cost of growth. Maybe start small. Pick one person whose judgment you trust and practice, simply saying thank you to their compliments without deflecting. See what happens. See if you survive the vulnerability. Your discomfort with compliments makes sense. It's based in real psychological mechanisms developed for real reasons. But understanding those reasons gives you the option to decide consciously whether to maintain these patterns or to slowly, carefully begin updating them. The choice is yours. The understanding is here. What you do with it determines whether compliments remain permanently uncomfortable or whether, eventually, you might allow them to land.